It's the 22nd of July. God, half the summer's done. So much for global warming and all the promises of some of the hottest weather we'll ever have, especially in Moscow and all. It's actually been a relatively cold summer with record lows. So much for global warming. Much of the rest of Russia has been normal in the range, but there you go. The same crap every year about global warming. It's all going to burn up. We're all going to die from dehydration because all the water is going to evaporate or some other crap that usually comes out. Well, I'm sorry, climate change, because, they couldn't get the global, they couldn't get the warming in the global well enough, so they go to climate change. Anyways, lots of rain. For all you Western European farmers who are now in drought, we got lots of rain. No problems here. And that's the theme of my video today. First out, shout out to all you Dutch farmers whose government is very actively, even though it's fallen, it's still there, actually trying to drive you out of business. And to the UK farmers and to the American ranchers and so on, we're going to go right down the same drain of the World Economic Forum. It was said, if we control all the farmland, we control the people. Why Bill Gates is the biggest owner of agricultural land in America, single owner, through his funds, through direct purchase, so on. He was also a pretty big owner, along with Monsanto and other corporate entities, of farmland in Ukraine. One of the reasons that the Ukrainian meat is being pushed so hard into suicide by Russian tank and artillery. It's because that's all that land that they relatively illegally bought in Ukraine. They lose this moment that becomes Russian property. And foreigners are not allowed to own agricultural land in Russia. They can rent it. By foreigners, I mean foreign people, physical entities, not legal entities. In other words, not corporations. Foreign corporations aren't allowed to own in any form. I don't think they're even allowed to rent. So a non-citizen can rent Russian agricultural land for like 47 years. But he's never going to be the owner until he becomes a citizen. Becomes a citizen, he can legalize the ownership of the land. But there is a catch. If that land goes fallow for more than, I think, 3 or 4 years. In other words, he's bought the land, but he's not going to use it. Then the government has the right to compensate and take the land away from him. Or if he's using the land for other things than agriculture, such as, start trying to build a housing complex on it without re-registering the land, which is relatively difficult when it comes to agricultural land these days. But all that aside, to all of you people out there who are being wrecked or having your farming careers destroyed, I've got a solution for you. I got a very good solution for you. Russia. Farmland in Russia is cheap, plentiful. The government's trying to get more and more farmers. Russia is already the real breadbasket of Europe. Sure still is in Ukraine. Ukraine was as part of the Soviet Union because of massive investment. Over the last 30 years, that hasn't been the case, and yields in Ukraine have been collapsing every single year. They've been going down and down. There were several years of really bad harvest, so Russia had to help feed Ukraine. Last one was about 15 years ago. It was a really hard, not even 15 years ago, it was 8 years ago, was the last one. It was a really horrid harvest. And Russia had to bail Ukraine out. 8 years ago? No, I guess it was before. But yeah, I guess 15 years. Wow, time flies. Anyways, that's the reason I had to lower the phone. Sorry about the change in video. Anyways, so Russian land is cheap, especially the further you get away from the big cities. In some of the small villages, look at it this way. A friend of mine bought, in a small village, bought 2 houses, Yeah, there are two wooden houses. They have electricity. They have gas, but they don't have sewage, or they don't have water running to the house. But that's something that can be built. Sink. They got wells, so they got well water. So sink pump into that well and pump the water into the house. The previous owners, they either didn't have the money or didn't want to. I don't know. But anyway, so you bought these two small wooden houses, and each on a lot of 8 acres, or about 10 acres in this village. That's basically dead. The village is dead because the youth have left, and only old people are left, and the ones that are alive. So he buys these two houses, 10 acres apiece, and he paid at that point 100,000 rubles for each. That's like $1,500. I mean, yeah, they're isolated. They're in Tver Oblast, and they're probably about 100 kilometers from the city of Tver itself. So, a small village, isolated village, but paid $1,500 for a livable house. It's not anything comfortable. It's 2 rooms or 3 rooms, small house, or $1,500. And he put sheep out there, and he hired a guy who lives in one of the houses to look after a sheep herd, and people order the meat, and he butchers a certain amount of them every year. He lives in the city, in Moscow, as a matter of fact. He's got his little side business going like that. And he's making money. So lamb is relatively expensive in Russia, or this part of Russia, anyways. So yeah, that's just one example. And you can get land, you can buy land in lots of places. Well, rent it if you're not a citizen, but then become a citizen and own it in perpetuity. So that's a solution. Cheap. Fertilizers, cheap. And the government pretty much leaves you alone. There are hundreds of forms to fill out. The tax forms are relatively quick and easy. I mean, as an individual businessman, my tax forms take about half an hour to fill out. That's usually because I'll sooner or later make at least one mistake and have to refill the 3 or 4 sheets out again. As an individual businessman. If you're working for a company, the company fills out your tax forms. You only fill out if you got a side hustle or something like that. So taxes in Russia are quick and easy. I mean, you unless you've got a seriously complicated situation, you would never hire an accountant. You don't need to. First time I was filling my tax paperwork out as a individual businessman, so self-employed businessman. There's a difference. There's self-employed, and there's a businessman. There's a difference in the tax base. The self-employed, they can only make up to I think 1 or 2 million rubles a year off of that, but they pay 3% tax. Businessman pays 6% tax up to 110 million rubles, so almost $2 million. And I think you can only have about 10 or 12 registered workers, something around there. Otherwise, then you go to the next stand, and then you have to form an extra corporate entity if you have a lot of workers. But anyway, so yeah, that's the system. Now, farmer, I mean, the job of farmer is to farm. We kind of still remember that fact. So the bureaucracy is minimal. I mean, it really, really is minimal. Unlike in the U.S., unlike in the UK, which is insane bureaucracy. There was a program for a while where British farmers moved to Russia. A lot of those guys stayed. There was a British company that was bringing them over. And they were all in shock at A, how much land they had under to till, and B, the government left them alone. And they just worked. They did the job they loved doing. That's why Russia feeds a large part of the world, a very large part of the world. It was always funny that, Western propaganda. The Russians are now going to starve. How? How are we going to starve? I mean, you've got to be butt-arse ignorant to believe Russia is ever going to starve. The only time we starved is when we had civil wars or wars. That's usually because the government, like the Bolsheviks in the 20s, decided to reinvent agriculture. Yeah, that was what the Ukrainians call Holodomor. The starvation was in Ukraine alone. And first of all, it wasn't in Western Ukraine, which were the people that screamed the loudest about it. Those guys were under the poles being suppressed. It was in Eastern Ukraine. It was in all of Russia. And actually, the worst hit area was Armenia. And that's because collective farming was going in, and the Soviets were doing the Bolsheviks were doing their agricultural theory experiments. And the Soviets already in the 70s started walking away from that by giving each farmer individual plots additional to the collective plots. And it turned out that almost over half the vegetables that were grown in the country were grown on these little small individual plots and taken to market, as opposed to the big collective farms. So the collective farms, of course, are a thing of the past. They're an antique. Well, there's some places still called kolkhoz, but they're not really collective farms in that sense anymore. There may be a partnership between a couple farmers, but it's not what it was on the Soviet times. And those times are gone. 30 years gone. Before a lot of those people listening to this podcast, to my recording here, were probably even born. So, anyways, you want to have a life where the government isn't crawling up your arse? You want to have a life where you can do what you want to do as a farmer, farm, where the World Economic Forum isn't going to destroy you and your family and starve your population? I mean, that's what's coming to most of the West, is rationing. You want to live in a country that's a Christian country with Christian roots, that's not going to shove gender reassignment into your kids and turn them into some kind of little perverts or invalids? That's Russia. Russia is that country that you want to live in. I'm sure those listening to this I don't know if I could call it a podcast, but this recording, most of you have realized what Russia is, but a lot of your friends haven't. They still believe what your owner class, the globalist financiers, are telling you, unfortunately. And continue to suffer because they think, oh, we still got a better deal than other places. Well, no. Those stereotypes are long gone. So anyways, I'll end this on this note. Come to Russia. What else have I got to say? Cheers. Go with God.